My name is Anika, and I am 33 years old now. For most of my life, I carried an emptiness that no amount of time or distance could erase. People say childhood pain fades as you grow older, but mine sharpened with every passing year, like a shard of glass lodged deeper into my chest. At 33, I have a steady career, a quiet apartment, and a handful of friends who think I am strong, independent, and perhaps even a little mysterious. They don't know the truth. They don't know that my strength was born from abandonment, that my independence was forced upon me, and that the mystery is nothing more than silence I've carried since the day my family cast me out. I disappeared when I was 21. On the day of my sister's wedding, my parents told me I didn't belong there. So I vanished, and even now, 12 years later, the memory of that day burns inside me. The morning of my sister's wedding should have been a day of celebration, a day where families gathered under one roof to share joy. But for me, it became the day I realized my place in my parents' world, invisible, unwanted, and disposable. I still remember the way my mother's voice sliced through me that morning. "It's better if you don't come today," she said softly. But her words carried a cruelty that didn't need shouting. "This is your sister's special day. We don't want any distractions. That was me. My father didn't even look up from his cup of tea. He didn't argue, didn't protest, didn't say, "Of course you'll be there. Your family too." No. His silence was his agreement. I had grown up in the shadows of my sister, Maya. She was the golden child, the pride of my parents, the one they paraded in front of relatives like a prized possession. I, on the other hand, was the mistake, the afterthought, the child who never quite fit into their definition of perfection. When we were young, the differences were subtle but sharp. Maya got new dresses for every festival. I wore her hand-me-downs. She was enrolled in dance classes and music lessons, while I was told to focus on household chores. When relatives visited, my parents beamed when Maya played the piano, but when I tried to speak, I was quickly hushed or sent to fetch tea. "Your sister has talent," my mother would say. "You should be more like her." But I wasn't. I was me, and that was never enough. By the time Maya got engaged, it was clear who mattered in the family. The house became a palace of celebration, walls draped in bright fabrics, the aroma of sweets filling every room, and endless streams of relatives who came to congratulate my parents on their daughter's perfect match. And through it all, I became a servant in my own home, running errands, ironing outfits, arranging flowers, making sure Maya's every need was met. I thought, naively, that at least on the wedding day, I would stand beside my family, even if just on the sidelines. That's what families did. No matter the differences, they stood together on important days. But I was wrong. When my mother told me not to come, she said it as if she were doing me a favor. As if she were sparing me embarrassment. "You wouldn't be comfortable," she added, almost kindly. "The guests might notice things. It's better this way." What things? My existence? My presence that apparently ruined the picture of their perfect family? I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her how she could call herself a mother when she could so easily cut one child out of the most important family event of our lives. But the words died in my throat as they always did. Years of being silenced had trained me well. Instead, I nodded, though every part of me ached. "I understand," I whispered, though I didn't. I went to my room, shut the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. Outside, I could hear laughter, music, and the bustle of preparations. My parents' voices floated through the air, warm and cheerful, but never for me. On my bedside table sat a simple invitation card, the only one I had ever touched. Not because they gave it to me, but because I had picked it up when it fell from a pile. It had Maya's name, the groom's name, the grand venue written in gold letters. My name wasn't anywhere in it, of course. I traced the letters with my finger, and a bitter laugh escaped my lips. I wasn't even invited to my own sister's wedding. For hours, I sat there, torn between anger and grief. Should I fight? Should I storm into the wedding and make them see me? Or should I obey, vanish quietly, and prove to them just how easy it was to erase me? In the end, my silence won, as it always had. That evening, while my parents and sister left for the grand ceremony, I packed a small bag. A few clothes, a notebook, the little money I had saved from tutoring neighborhood kids, and the one photo of me as a child where I was smiling, before I learned my smile wasn't worth much to anyone. I stood at the threshold of my room, looking one last time at the walls that had witnessed my invisibility. I should have felt sadness, but what I felt instead was clarity. If they didn't want me there, then I wouldn't be. Not just for the wedding, but forever. The house erupted with music as the wedding procession left. I waited until the sound of drums faded into the distance. Then, without telling anyone, I slipped out into the night. The street outside was lit with lanterns and fairy lights, all strung up for Maya's big day. Strangers smiled as they walked past, dressed in their finest clothes, heading to celebrate a union I was forbidden from witnessing. No one noticed me, just as my parents had always intended. As I walked away from the glowing lights of home, I promised myself something. If they wanted me gone, I would give them exactly that. I would vanish so completely that my absence would haunt them. One day, when they looked around at their perfect family and realized something was missing, it would be too late. The night air was cool, and for the first time in my life, I felt oddly free, but beneath that freedom was a fire. A fire of betrayal, of pain, of years of being cast aside. A fire that whispered a single truth. This is not the end. One day, they will regret this. That was the night I vanished, and it was also the night my revenge quietly began. The first night I left home, I slept at the bus station. My bag was my pillow, and the noise of people coming and going became my lullaby. I remember watching families holding each other tightly, travelers saying goodbye with tears and promises of return. I sat alone in a corner, hugging myself, a silent witness to a world where I didn't belong. I was 21, with no plan and no safety net. My parents had never saved anything for me, not money, not love, not a future. Maya was their investment. I was their mistake. For days, I drifted from one cheap lodge to another, living off the small savings I had from tutoring neighborhood kids. When the money began to run out, desperation set in. I considered returning home, even if it meant being humiliated again. But the memory of my mother's words, "It's better if you don't come," burned like acid in my chest. No. I would rather starve on the streets than crawl back to beg for scraps of affection. Eventually, I found work at a small bookstore. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me enough to pay for a tiny room in a rundown neighborhood. My landlord was a grumpy old man who barely acknowledged me, but at least the rent was low. The walls of my room were cracked and the ceiling leaked during monsoon rains, but it was mine. For the first time in my life, I had a space that belonged to me and no one could tell me I wasn't wanted there. Still, nights were the hardest. I often lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how the wedding had gone, if anyone noticed my absence. Did Maya even ask where I was? Did my parents tell the guests that their elder daughter had vanished? Or did they simply pretend I didn't exist? The pain of being erased gnawed at me, but slowly that pain hardened into resolve. If they didn't want me, I would build a life so far beyond their reach that one day, when they heard my name again, it would not be with pity. It would be with awe. The bookstore became my sanctuary. I spent hours surrounded by words, stories of people who had risen from nothing, tales of betrayal, loss, and triumph. Books became my teachers, showing me paths I had never imagined. I started reading about business, psychology, even finance, subjects I had never touched because my parents thought education was wasted on me. By day, I worked. By night, I studied. It wasn't easy. There were times when hunger clawed at me, when I had to choose between dinner and a notebook. But each sacrifice became fuel for my determination. 1 year passed. Then 2. Slowly I climbed. I began tutoring students again, this time more seriously, building a reputation in the neighborhood. Parents trusted me, children respected me. The extra income helped me move to a slightly better apartment, a small victory, but it felt like conquering a mountain. At 25, I enrolled in evening courses at a community college. It was exhausting, working all day, studying all night, but I refused to give up. With each certificate, each passing grade, I felt the chains of my past loosening, and yet no matter how far I went, the shadows of my family followed me. Sometimes I would see Maya's face in newspaper clippings, her wedding photo, her husband's business achievements, their perfect smiling portraits. They looked like royalty, while I was still stitching my life together piece by piece. I would lie awake staring at those pictures and whisper to myself, appearances are not forever. Perfection is fragile. One day their castle will crumble, and I will be the storm that brings it down. It wasn't hatred that kept me going. It was something deeper, a hunger for justice, a need to prove that the child they discarded could rise higher than they ever imagined. By the time I turned 28, I had built something remarkable. I wasn't rich, not yet, but I had started a small tutoring academy of my own. With a few dedicated teachers and dozens of eager students, the little venture quickly grew. Parents spread the word, enrollment doubled, and for the first time in my life, people looked at me with pride, not pity. The shadows of loneliness still lingered, but I had begun to see light. I had friends now, fellow teachers, students who admired me. Some evenings we would sit in the academy after classes, laughing, sharing food, building the kind of family I had never known. Still, I kept my past hidden. To them, I was simply Anika, the determined woman who had built her life from scratch. They didn't know about Maya or my parents, or the wedding that had cast me into exile. That was my secret, locked away like a wound that hadn't fully healed. But the world has a strange way of circling back. One evening, as I was closing the academy, a newspaper slipped from a student's bag. On the front page was a photo of Maya and her husband, smiling as they cut the ribbon for a new company branch. The headline praised them as a power couple. I stared at the picture for a long time. My sister, dressed in jewels, glowing with wealth and fame. My parents must have been so proud. I felt no jealousy, only clarity. The life I was building wasn't just for me anymore. It was for the girl who had been erased, for the child who was told she was a distraction. It was for revenge. That night, I made a vow to myself. I would no longer simply survive. I would rise so high, so far, that when I finally stood before my family again, they would not recognize the broken girl they cast out. They would see a woman carved from fire and shadows, and I would make them regret every moment they made me feel invisible. The life in shadows had made me strong, but it was time to step into the light. I was 30 years old when I finally returned to the city I had once fled. 9 years had passed since the night of Maya's wedding, the night I vanished. In those years, I had rebuilt myself piece by piece. I was no longer the scared girl who slept in bus stations and wept alone in dark rooms. I was the founder of a successful tutoring academy with branches in 2 neighboring towns. I had savings, respect, and most importantly, confidence. But deep inside, the wound still pulsed. And so I returned. Not as a daughter seeking her family's embrace, but as a stranger ready to study the battlefield before the war. The city hadn't changed much. The same crowded streets, the same rows of shops, the same festival lights strung across the bazaar. But I had changed. I walked through those streets with my head held high, dressed not in hand-me-downs but in clothes I had chosen, bought with my own money. Nobody could tell me I was invisible anymore. Still, as I neared the neighborhood where my parents lived, my heart raced. I hadn't planned to face them yet. No, not so soon. Instead, I intended to watch, to listen, to uncover the truths, hidden beneath their polished smiles. First thing I discovered was that Maya's perfect life was not as untouchable as it appeared in newspapers. Through acquaintances and quiet inquiries, I learned that her husband's company, once praised as rapidly growing, was drowning in debt. They lived extravagantly, far beyond their means, and whispers of unpaid loans floated in the business community. Maya, however, still flaunted her wealth, dressing in designer clothes and hosting lavish parties. My parents boasted endlessly about her, as if repeating her success could make it real. One evening, curiosity pulled me to a restaurant near the city center, a place known for hosting the wealthy. I sat at a corner table, half hidden behind a potted plant, as Maya and her husband entered. She looked older than I remembered, her smile painted on too perfectly, her laugh just a little too loud. Her husband carried the weight of stress in his shoulders, his phone constantly buzzing. They were greeted warmly, yes, but I noticed the subtle glances, the ones that hinted people knew more than they said. As I sipped my tea quietly, a group of women at the next table whispered, "Did you hear? They had to mortgage the second house." Still pretending like nothing's wrong, another voice added. The pride of their parents, huh? Pride doesn't pay debts, I almost laughed. For years, my parents had erased me to showcase Maya's glory. And now, that glory was crumbling before their very eyes, though they were too blind to admit it. The irony was delicious, but I wasn't ready to act yet. Patience, I told myself. Revenge is not served in haste. It must be slow, deliberate, and undeniable. I spent weeks in the city, blending into the background while observing from the shadows. I learned where my parents now lived, an upgraded, larger house paid for by Maya's husband during his peak years. I stood across the street one evening, staring at the glowing windows, wondering if they ever thought of me. Did they ever regret pushing me out? Did they ever imagine their forgotten daughter might be alive, thriving, just a few steps away? The answer came when I overheard two elderly neighbors gossiping outside. They used to have another daughter, didn't they? One asked. Yes, the other replied, lowering her voice. But she disappeared years ago. Poor thing, they never talk about her anymore. Never? Never. It's as if she never existed. The words stung, but they also fueled me. They wanted me erased, and I had let them believe it for nearly a decade. That was about to change. One day, while walking through the marketplace, I caught sight of my mother. She was buying jewelry, her posture as proud as ever, her voice sharp with the vendor. I froze, watching from behind a row of scarves. Time seemed to collapse, the years between then and now disappearing in an instant. For a moment, I considered approaching her, just to see the look on her face. But I held myself back. No, not yet. If I revealed myself now, it would be on their terms. And I refused to give them that power. Instead, I let her pass, her bangles clinking as she walked away, oblivious to the daughter watching her from the shadows. That night, I returned to my rented apartment and stared at the ceiling. My emotions were a storm, anger, sorrow, but also a strange kind of triumph. For the first time, I realized I wasn't the broken girl anymore. I had power, knowledge, and above all, patience. It was clear to me then, my family was built on illusions. Illusions of wealth, success, and perfection. And illusions are fragile. All it takes is a single crack, and everything shatters. I decided I would be that crack. But to strike effectively, I needed to know more. I began gathering information quietly, through contacts in the business world, old acquaintances who remembered me vaguely, and even hired help who could access records I couldn't. Piece by piece, a picture emerged. Maya's husband was involved in shady deals, desperate to keep his company afloat. Loans had been taken from dangerous people. My parents, meanwhile, continued to boast about their daughter's perfect life, oblivious to the danger lurking beneath. I felt no sympathy. Instead, I felt opportunity. Every empire built on lies eventually falls. And I would be the one to push. The time for silence was ending. The return of the forgotten child was only just beginning. By the time I was 31, my plan had taken shape. Revenge wasn't just about storming into their lives and shouting, "You abandoned me." No, that would be too easy, too forgettable. True revenge required precision. It needed to be slow, undeniable, and devastating enough that they would never recover from the echo of their own choices. I wanted my family to feel what I had felt, helpless, invisible, and discarded. And the only way to achieve that was to make the world see them for who they really were. The first thread of my web began with Maya's husband, Arjun. His debts were no secret among certain circles, but society at large still saw him as a successful businessman. I began digging into his company's records, and with the help of a discreet accountant I had once tutored, I uncovered falsified documents, loans disguised as profits, inflated valuations, and deals that bordered on illegal. I didn't expose them right away. Instead, I planted seeds, an anonymous email to a journalist here, a quiet tip to a competitor there. I watched as whispers began to spread in the business world, questions surfacing where once there had only been applause. At the same time, I turned my attention to Maya. She had built her identity around being flawless, the perfect wife, the perfect daughter, the perfect sister. Except she had never been a perfect sister, not to me. And soon, she wouldn't be perfect to anyone. Through contacts, I learned she had been frequenting high-end boutiques, buying jewelry and clothes on credit. Her social media painted a life of glitter and wealth, but the reality was debt collectors were circling. I gathered receipts, testimonies, photographs, evidence that her lifestyle was a facade. But still, I didn't strike. Not yet. Instead, I attended one of her social gatherings in disguise. A charity gala she organized for appearances, where the wealthy came dressed in diamonds and pearls to sip champagne and boast about generosity. I wore a simple but elegant gown, hairstyled differently, makeup crafted to soften my features. Nobody recognized me. From the shadows of the hall, I watched Maya laugh, pose for photographs, and clink glasses with people she secretly owed money to. It was almost poetic. She smiled too brightly. Her laughter rang too loud, as though she were trying to drown out the sound of her crumbling world. I slipped a few whispers into the crowd that night. Nothing too obvious, just casual remarks to the right ears, questions about the unpaid bills at boutiques, the rumors of mortgaged properties. Gossip travels faster than truth, and by the end of the night, I saw the subtle shift in people's glances. Admiration had been replaced with suspicion. It was working. But my revenge wasn't just about Maya and Arjun. It was about my parents, too. They were the architects of my pain, the ones who had erased me from their lives to showcase their perfect daughter. I wanted the same society they boasted to be the one that tore their pride to shreds. To achieve that, I began weaving connections. I befriended a few relatives who didn't remember me well, presenting myself as a successful academy founder from another city. Over tea and casual conversation, I nudged them into speaking of Maya and Arjun. The more they spoke, the more I guided their words, hinting at things I already knew, letting curiosity do the rest. It didn't take long for rumors to ripple through the family tree. Cousins began to question, aunts whispered behind closed doors, uncles shook their heads over whiskey. My parents, still oblivious, continued their bragging, unaware that the ground beneath them was shifting. The web tightened further when I discovered something unexpected. Arjun was having an affair. Late-night meetings with a woman from his office, secret hotel bookings, whispered phone calls. It wasn't my business, but it became my weapon. The same sister who had stolen every ounce of love from our parents would soon know what it felt like to be betrayed. I gathered everything: photographs, receipts, proof. Each piece of evidence was another thread in my web, ready to ensnare them. Still, I was patient. A spider doesn't rush to its prey. It waits until the web is strong enough that escape is impossible. The final stage came with timing. My parents were planning Maya and Arjun's 5th wedding anniversary celebration. A grand event, of course, with hundreds of guests, media coverage, and endless opportunities for them to boast about their perfect family. It would be their pride's peak, and I would make sure it became their ruin. For weeks, I prepared in silence. Anonymous packages sent to journalists, envelopes slipped under doors, quiet tips to influential guests. By the time the celebration arrived, the whispers had grown into storms, though my family remained blissfully unaware. I still remember the night before the event. I sat in my apartment, staring at the folder of evidence spread across my desk. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was I becoming cruel? Was I sinking to their level? Then I remembered the girl who cried herself to sleep at 21 because her own parents told her she was a distraction. I remembered the years of invisibility, the loneliness, the hunger. And I knew this wasn't cruelty. This was justice. My web was ready, and at the anniversary celebration, the golden family that had erased me would finally face the darkness they had buried for years. The night of Maya and Arjun's 5th wedding anniversary arrived like a storm dressed in silk. The city's elite gathered at a luxury hotel ballroom, glittering with chandeliers and golden drapes. Tables overflowed with flowers, champagne, and delicacies. It was a celebration of perfection, or so they thought. I entered the hall unnoticed, dressed elegantly yet simply, my identity veiled by time and transformation. No one expected me to be there, not after 9 years of silence. To them, I was a ghost. But tonight, the ghost had returned, not to haunt quietly, but to burn the stage they had built on lies. The evening began predictably. My parents stood near the entrance, radiant with pride, welcoming guests as though they were royalty. My father's back was straighter than I had ever seen, his voice booming with joy. My mother's sari shimmered under the lights, her smile wide, her eyes glowing with the self-satisfaction of a woman whose sacrifices had paid off. And then there was Maya. She stood beside Arjun, dazzling in a sequined gown, every hair pinned perfectly, every gesture calculated to impress. She posed for cameras, clung to her husband's arm, and laughed at jokes as if her life wasn't collapsing behind closed doors. I stayed in the crowd's edges, watching, waiting. The clock ticked toward the moment I had chosen. The speeches began. My father took the microphone first, boasting of how proud he was to see his daughter living the life he always dreamed for her. My mother followed, her words dripping with praise, thanking the guests for celebrating a union built on love and success. Then Maya spoke, her voice confident, her smile bright. "To my dear husband," she said, holding Arjun's hand, "these 5 years have been the happiest of my life. You are my partner, my protector, my everything." My jaw tightened. The hypocrisy of it nearly choked me. Finally, Arjun stepped forward, giving a rehearsed speech about family, loyalty, and love. Every word was a lie. It was time. The lights dimmed slightly for the planned slideshow, a montage of Maya and Arjun's journey, photographs of their wedding, trips abroad, family gatherings. Guests applauded, murmuring with admiration. But I had arranged a different ending to that slideshow. Just as the final photo faded, the screen flickered. Confusion rippled through the hall as unfamiliar images appeared. First, documents. Company records exposing Arjun's debts, falsified reports, and hidden loans. Gasps spread across the crowd as pages turned, proof after proof of corruption. Then came photographs. Arjun, hand in hand with a woman who was not Maya. Hotel receipts with dates and signatures. Images of late-night meetings, intimate embraces. The ballroom erupted in whispers, shock, and outrage. Maya's face turned pale as she stared at the screen, her smile frozen, her hand slipping from Arjun's arm. But the storm wasn't over. The final slide appeared, a letter, written in my mother's handwriting, the same words I would never forget. "Anika's presence will ruin Maya's day. It's better she not be there." The letter lingered on the screen, magnified for every guest to see. The crowd fell silent, the weight of the words sinking in. My parents' proud faces crumbled in horror. I stepped forward then, emerging from the shadows. The room turned, eyes widening, gasps escaping lips. Recognition flickered like lightning. "It's me," I said, my voice steady, strong. Anika, the daughter they erased. The sister they discarded. My parents stood frozen, mouths opening but no words coming. Maya stared at me as if she'd seen a ghost, her face pale with shock and shame. Arjun's composure cracked completely. Sweat glistened on his forehead as whispers about his scandal grew louder around him. I looked at them all. The family who had abandoned me, the man who had betrayed my sister, the parents who had chosen pride over love. And then I spoke, my words cutting through the silence. You built your lives on lies. You celebrated wealth you didn't have, love that didn't exist, perfection that was never real. You erased me because I didn't fit your picture. But tonight, everyone sees the truth. The crowd stirred, people shaking their heads, murmuring in disbelief. Journalists scribbled furiously. Cameras captured every second. The humiliation was complete. Maya's voice broke through, trembling. "Anika, you—" she faltered, unable to finish. Her eyes filled with tears, though whether of shame or fury I couldn't tell. Arjun tried to speak, to deny, but the evidence was undeniable. Guests turned their backs on him, whispers turning into condemnation. His empire, already fragile, shattered in an instant. My parents stood rooted in place, their reputations crumbling before their very eyes. For years they had bragged about their perfect daughter, their flawless family. Now their pride was dust. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to fight. The web I had woven tightened on its own, crushing them in front of the very society they had used to erase me. When I turned to leave, no one stopped me. Some looked at me with pity, others with awe, but most with respect. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. I was undeniable. As I stepped out of the glittering hall into the cool night air, I felt a weight lift off my chest. I had given them their reckoning, their day of truth, but revenge, I realized, wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something new. The forgotten daughter had returned, and she would never vanish again. The morning after the anniversary was quiet, almost eerily so. The storm I had unleashed the night before still lingered in the city's whispers. Headlines screamed of scandal, business tycoon exposed, debt, lies, and betrayal. Golden daughter's perfect marriage crumbles at gala. Forgotten sister returns. Truth shatters family illusions everywhere. My family's name was no longer spoken with reverence, but with ridicule. The very pride they had built their lives upon had turned into ashes, blown apart in one night. I sat on the balcony of my small rented apartment, sipping tea as the sun rose over the skyline. For years I had dreamt of this moment, the day they would finally feel what I had felt, the day their masks would fall. And it had come true. Yet, as the light warmed my face, I felt no wild joy, no gloating satisfaction. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Relief. For the first time in 12 years, the weight of invisibility was gone. I was no longer the girl who had been erased. I had spoken, I had been heard, and I had been seen. The world now knew my truth, and that was enough. But I also knew this. If I lingered too long in their downfall, I would chain myself to their ruin. I had built my life from nothing once, and I could not let revenge define who I was forever. It was time for a new dawn. The following weeks were a blur of chaos for my family. Arjun's company collapsed, investors pulled out, and lawsuits piled up. Maya withdrew from public life, her once glamorous world reduced to whispers and closed doors. My parents, stripped of their pride, avoided society gatherings altogether. Some distant relatives tried to reach out to me, curious about the forgotten daughter who had resurfaced. But I declined their invitations. I had no desire to bask in gossip or sympathy. I didn't want their pity or their sudden interest. Where were they when I was hungry, homeless, and forgotten? One evening, however, a knock at my door startled me. When I opened it, Maya stood there, Her eyes were swollen, her face pale, stripped of all the arrogance I remembered. She looked smaller, almost fragile. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then her voice cracked. "Why, Anika?" she asked. "Why did you do this to me?" The words ignited a fire in my chest. "Why?" I repeated, my voice trembling with restrained anger. "Because you all erased me. Because you stood on a stage of lies built on my silence. Because our parents told me I wasn't worthy of standing beside you on your wedding day." Maya's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know they said that to you. I didn't—" She paused, guilt flickering in her expression. "But you've destroyed everything." I took a deep breath. "No, Maya, I didn't destroy anything. I only revealed what was already broken. You lived in illusions. I just showed them to the world." She looked at me for a long moment, then lowered her gaze. Without another word, she turned and walked away. I didn't call her back. I couldn't. Some wounds ran too deep for reconciliation. Months passed. The city moved on to newer scandals, as cities always do. My family remained fractured, but I no longer cared to follow their every step. My life had shifted, my focus returning to the academy I had built. It grew stronger than ever, fueled by a new purpose. I expanded branches into rural towns, offering education to children who, like me once, felt invisible. I gave scholarships to girls whose families said their brothers were more important. Every success story felt like a small piece of healing for the child inside me who had once been denied love. I was 33 now, and I finally understood something. Revenge had been necessary, but it wasn't my destination. It was the bridge I needed to cross to reach freedom. One evening, as I walked through the academy halls, a young girl tugged at my sleeve. She was shy, barely 10, clutching her notebook to her chest. "Miss Anika," she whispered, "my parents. They wanted me to quit school because of money. But you gave me the scholarship. When I grow up, I'll be a teacher like you." Her words struck me harder than any revenge ever could. My eyes stung and I bent down to hug her. In that moment, I realized this was my true legacy. Not the ruin of those who had abandoned me, but the rise of those who would never be abandoned because of me. As for my parents, I never saw them again. Not out of hatred, but out of choice. Some bonds once broken can't be mended without bleeding. I had no desire to bleed anymore. Instead, I chose peace. On my 33rd birthday, I sat alone on a quiet hill overlooking the city. The wind carried the scent of flowers. The sky painted itself in shades of orange and gold. For the first time in years, I felt light. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, "You are not forgotten anymore. You never were. You are enough." The forgotten daughter had become the architect of her own destiny. And this was her new dawn.